New Landing's Job Chat is brought to you in part by the Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future, and by the EBS Group with an unparalleled background in Oracle solutions and services.
You have a number of stories that can help you as a job seeker or as an entrepreneur. Well, how do you keep track of them? How do you know when to use them? You'll find out today on Job Chat. Your hosts are Hector Silva and Sarah Kane, and our guest is Andrew Nemiccolo. Sarah, can you tell us about your guest?
Sure thing. Andrew is founder of 7 Story Learning, which helps individuals and organizations communicate through story in order to learn, lead, and sell more effectively. Through group workshops, organization-wide initiatives, and individual coaching, Andrew teaches the simple chapter method of finding, refining, and delivering great stories. Welcome, Andrew.
Thanks for having me.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
In a couple of previous Job Chats, you talked about why stories work, and then you ran us through a process on how we can help develop our own personal stories. Well, when you do that and you come up with a number of stories, how do you keep track of them? How do you know when to use them?
Great question, Hector. So one of the ideas is to use a story bank. Stories are really powerful. It's great to have a story because it's one of the most effective ways that we know to communicate, to persuade, to motivate, to teach someone. But if you only have a couple of stories, you're become sort of very limited. And I will pick on uncles, the proverbial uncle. We all know that uncle that at holiday parties tells the same story, and he's told the same darn story about 87 times. You could probably finish it for him. And that's certainly not someone we want to be. So really the idea of having a story bank is it's a toolkit. It's a way of organizing stories. If someone takes the time to go through the process of story mining and start to think about things they've done well and ways to organize those into stories, they kind of need to go in a house. Need to go in a place, and I'll use the closet analogy. There's no right or wrong way to organize a story bank. It just needs to be available so that you can retrieve the right thing at the right time. You may file your papers in different ways, alphabetically, chronologically. You may organize the clothes in your closet by colors. Maybe you organize it by item. All the shoes are together. Maybe you organize it by season. All the winter clothes are. It really doesn't matter as long as it works for you and allows you to do what you need to do. And that's kind of what a story bank is. A story bank is a way of structuring and giving yourself the ability to get the right story at the right time. So what does that mean? So for a job seeker or an entrepreneur, you may have some key themes you want to brand about yourself. Maybe it's creative and analytical, teamwork, or speed. I go really fast. Whatever those broad themes are, if that's how you're going to brand yourself, you sure as heck better have some stories. And thinking about the ways that you want to brand yourself, but also the folks with whom you're speaking, what are they going to want to know about you? Are they going to hire you? Are they investing money in you? Are they going to work from you? Are they buying from you? What are the questions they're going to have? So thinking about it, it's not a one and done. It's sort of a back and forth process. I ask folks to kind of sketch out. We can do mind mapping. We can actually just do a grid. But at its simplest form, it's just filling in those boxes with stories that show, well, yeah, teamwork. Let me tell you about the projects I've done. 3 years ago, let me talk about the IT project I did, the volunteer community thing that we overcame, and we passed this new legislation to protect our neighborhood. Just going through and be able to provide tangible examples is a really powerful thing. And most job seekers, some entrepreneurs may not go to the length to do this. So by doing it, you're immediately distinguishing yourself from the pack.
How many stories would you say you should have for each theme?
7.7.
7.7. I like it.
Just kidding. I think it depends. I found that you want to lead with your strong stuff, and up to 8 to 10 stories is a real nice number. The beauty of stories is that they can be used in different ways. So you think about maybe something that you've done. Maybe you worked on something, Sarah, that it required you to communicate some bad news, but you also had maybe some creativity involved in then how you fix the problem. Well, you could kind of use that story in both regards, right? You could talk about one or the other. This is why it's important to have a story bank, because once you've kind of used that story for creativity, it's kind of hard to go back, let's say in a traditional interview, and say, remember 15 minutes into the hour when I told you about that cleanup project we did? Well, again, let me remind you, you can't do that. So you've got to have another example to be able to go deep. It just depends.
When you're talking about a story bank, are these documented stories things that you have written down and then go back to and modify or refine as time goes on?
Yeah, I think it's at least in writing. And by in writing, I don't mean, I try to counsel people not to write it out verbatim, word for word.
Right.
We use a technique called signposting. It's very common. It's think about that arc, the key points. What was the conflict? How did you solve it? What did you learn? Just those key points. It's something that someone could have sort of a master document, maybe on a piece of paper, listing out all the different stories and the key themes. And then maybe there's just a little index card for each individual story. I think what I found is, whatever works for you, but if people try to write it out verbatim, it sounds rehearsed, it sounds canned. Ironically, I think by practicing with bullets, it sounds less rehearsed, in my experience.
So you would definitely practice your stories with your friends and family before you go out and use it at a networking event or a job interview.
Absolutely. You don't want it to make it sound like, as the words leave your mouth, it's the very first time those words have left your mouth, right? It should be natural. It should flow easily. And, friends and family are a great place to start. And hopefully you've been talking with them in terms of already getting good story ideas, coworkers, et cetera. But doing a low-risk setting. Absolutely.
So there's a certain amount of anticipation that you have to have also, wouldn't you say? If you're going to go to a meeting or you know that you're going to meet certain people and the type of topic that's going to be discussed, you should already know in advance what stories are at your disposal that would fit that situation.
I think you're making two great points there, Hector. One is know your audience, right? What are they concerned about? If I'm going to an organization that's really concerned about safety, and I have all these speed stories of how fast I go, how fast I get things done, that might not be a good fit. It might be perfectly fine in another organization, but I'm going to want to be thinking about that. So I think that's a great point. Look at the types of stories they're already telling. So if I were going in to talk to someone, I'd look at their website, I'd look on discussion boards, I'd talk to people from that organization. If you really listen for the types of stories that people share, that tells you the real culture, the culture that's maybe not published on all the web pages formally, but some of the background culture as well. What do they highlight? What do they point out? Some brands build culture with their story. Nordstrom's is famous for their excellent customer service. And when they mean customer service, they really mean customer service. There are stories of associates driving out on their own time to deliver the goods to a customer's house. In fact, I was talking with a friend who used to work at Nordstrom's, and he actually said, yeah, I've got a Nordstrom story, let me tell you. And sure enough, he had one. That was really what they celebrated. So if you pay attention to what that organization celebrates and praises, that's probably a good example of the kind of stories you're going to want to have.
And you could also be looking at, say, a job description before going in for an interview and pick out of that what they're going to be looking for?
Yeah, I think so. So, thinking about sort of the interview context, I think there are different levels at which you can tell a story, Sarah, and I call this sort of peeling the onion. So some jobs just have technical certifications or business skills that are just required. I may need to show that I have a degree or certificate, or yes, I've performed this procedure. It's not my first transplant. Don't worry. People need to be able to show that. But beyond those kind of surface level business skills of yes, I can code in C++ or something. I always encourage folks to think more deeply. What are the transferable skills that are going to be more relatable? Let me show you how I was creative though in being able to do everything in one language and not having to bring in a bunch of interfaces. Let me show you how creative this was and how I got the project done faster. I communicate with my partner to make sure we could do it this way. Really explore the story for all the potential it's worth. Because some people might connect with it at he can do this computer language. Other people are going to connect at it at the, wow, this is someone who really thinks outside the box. They looked to the left and right to figure a way to do this even more succinctly. So I think that sort of process is really part of how you built the toolbox out. Swiss Army knife mentality.
And once you have that story bank, it's not something that's static. It's something that you have to keep replenishing. So as you're going through, how many times do you go back to this and add to or change any of those stories?
Ideally, as often as possible. And I'll admit, I haven't refreshed mine in a little while, and it's just sort of reminding me that I need to go back and look at the past couple quarters and think, what have I done differently? What's happened lately? And really to jot those down and put myself through that process. I think sometimes if you have that story radar up, you kind of know it when you see it. Certainly, let's be honest, the times that people really dig in and do it is often when they know they have a really important discussion coming up. Typically for employment, starting a business, an important sales meeting, that's when it tends to happen. And there's nothing wrong with that, but I think the more you can stay on top of it and not let years go by, the better off you are. Otherwise you become like that one story Charlie.
Sure, and the fact is that none of us stay the same. Everything changes, we change, our situations change, and that story that we had from 1999 might not fit in 2012.
Yeah, exactly. And that's another good reason, by the way, Hector, I think, to look at stories not always necessarily at the business skill level or technical skill level, but for the deeper thing. So, if I'm telling a really intricate, jargon-heavy story about something I did in financial services or technology in 1999, immediately you may start getting skeptical and saying, this industry's totally changed, buddy. Sorry, you're out of there. But if I can speak to that same story, and we'll use that coding example, maybe nobody uses that language anymore. But I've learned new languages. The important lesson there is I was the first guy to say, hey, we don't need to do it this complex way. There's a more innovative way. I use creativity. I use problem solving. That kind of stuff never dies. And that's where I think you get more utility and value out of looking deeper to some of the transferable skills.
So you may not throw that story away, but take the good parts of that story and then add to that a newer story that you can meld in there.
Absolutely, repurposing it. And then let's not forget that the other important thing going into an interview is not simply to tell your story. So hopefully you brand yourself and you're memorable and people are talking about you later. Hey, remember the guy who coded it that really great way? You give them sort of a hook to hang their hat on. But I think it's also important just to be thinking about how they can convey that.
New Landing's Job Chat will be back right after a word from our sponsors.
Hello, my name is William Easley, Managing Director of Wealth Management with Prosperity Advisory Group. While under unemployment stress, there may be a temptation to become more conservative with your investment allocation. Recognizing how short-term problems can adversely influence your thinking about long-term goals can help you avoid costly mistakes. It's reasonable to expect that you may need cash and more liquid assets at your disposal as you assess your financial situation over a job loss. However, you must avoid selling long-term investments as a panic response to uncertainty. You may trigger an unwanted tax or generate an ill-timed loss. Conversely, being unemployed isn't the time to take a flyer on a hot stock tip, ratcheting up your risk level in hopes of a quick profit to make up for lost income. You may do nothing more than compound your cash flow problem. A reasoned and balanced approach is recommended. Start by seeking out a qualified financial planner, such as a CFP professional, who can help you assess your unemployment situation, suggest strategies for conserving wealth, and perhaps help you with ideas on how to best protect assets. It's important to sort out alternatives while structuring a plan around your short-term objectives and your long-term goals. Again, I'm William Easley with Prosperity Advisory Group, the next step in your financial future.
Say you're an entrepreneur and you go to a networking event and you get the tell me about yourself. What do you do? How do you use a story in that context?
That's a good question. I had a business coach that actually really helped me with this one, that I think gave some great advice. And what she said was, you may not want to start with a really complex story. A great way to look at it is to say, I help people blank. Or clients call me when. And then just state the conflict, state the problem. They have problems with their taxes. Their roof is leaking. They can't figure out how to get their train to start, their car to start. Those are sort of silly examples, but I think if it's specific and yet still prompts a question, then you can get into story mode. One thing to be careful about stories is, and I'm a big lover of stories, is you can't always use them in all times and places. We also want to be careful not to use storytelling voice because, okay, there was a time, more power to folks that can do that well, but it's not always going to be the most appropriate for every business situation. We want it to be natural and authentic.
You have to be yourself.
Yeah. And remember, again, the goal is to get the other person to tell you a story, not necessarily to brand it our own way.
So stories build upon each other between you.
I think so. That's really the idea of story learning. If I can prompt a story from you, get you talking, and telling me, the same thing happened to me, Andrew, you never believe it. If I can get, to use the situation of interviewing, great. If the interview is talking and they're excited and engaged and remembering something, that's great by my book. I think we want to have that sort of 50-50 balance because then they're engaged.
So the goal of storytelling is really to find a connection with another person.
Yeah, I think so. And that's where I think the balancing that logic and emotion comes in. The best stories are ones that certainly have a little bit of facts and figures, but really they're heavy on emotions. Why am I so excited about this? What can we connect on? And that's where driving down to those transferable truths, those transferable skills. I may not know much about your computer language, but I can get really excited or unexcited about a team working together or not working together.
So could your story bank contain second and third party stories? You've talked to somebody, and then when you talk to somebody else, say, I remember a conversation I had with so-and-so. He told me this story, and from that I learned.
Absolutely. I think, you don't always have to be the hero of the story. Certainly in a job situation, you're going to want to often be a central character because it'd be kind of weird not to be involved in that. But I think those roles for mentors, for allies, showing other people that you spoke with, found stories can have a place. It wouldn't be my lead, but certainly talking about people who have inspired you or people who you model things after, I think gives someone insight into how you think. The biggest question actually is in building a story bank is if you look at is not so much the stories themselves initially, is looking at the rows and columns. So you imagine a grid. And if I decide I want to have, be known as the trustworthy person or the speed person or the creative person or the determination person, I need to have a lot of stories about that. There's also another axis, and that could be anything you want. So let's say I've worked in manufacturing, retail, and banking. Well, I'm probably going to want to have stories from each of those areas to show depth, to show breadth, to show lots of different skill sets. So having not only sort of general transferable skills, but also maybe different fields. There's really no right or wrong way to do this. Again, using the closet analogy, it's just so that I can get the best stuff available. This is purposeful storytelling. This is having a way to think about your story so it's not accidental. And you talked about replenishing, Hector, that you just sort of made me think of something. Sometimes stories don't come up when you're sitting down. I'm going to sit down and do stories. And that's helpful to do, I think, a couple times a year to have a more structured process. A lot of times they just come up. You'll be talking to someone. Have pen and paper, write that down. It's a much more organic way to develop it on the fly as things come in.
So you can get the idea and then go flesh it out later.
Exactly.
It seems to me that all of the things we've talked about in these 3 job chats, it's all part of one whole process. Because, yes, stories are important, and we talked about why they're important. But they're only important if you develop your stories correctly, and then if you have them available when you need them.
Exactly.
So it's not a case of just telling stories. There's some work behind it.
Absolutely, and I think it's well worth it, and precisely because it's how our minds are wired. If you can't beat them, join them. Your facts and figures at the end of the day, as I learned, are not going to convince folks as effectively as weaving some of those into story format. And it's more fun too. Everybody likes hearing a good story. It's why Hollywood exists, and it's just how you probably speak with your friends. And so why not speak that way in a job interview or a business meeting? It's just a more natural way to communicate.
And aside from just communicating with people, these stories should be able to help you make decisions whenever you have to sit down and make decisions, and you can reach back to these stories and tell yourself the story so that it helps you with your decision.
Yeah, those teaching stories are great. Annette Simmons talks a lot about that in books of, you can give a rule, so in terms of, corporate culture of things. So, it's one thing to tell a team, the policy is this, but it's another thing to, it's $75 per day for such and such in our expense policy, for whatever that might be. But instead, telling a story about how someone had to grapple with, wow, should I stay in the expensive hotel or should I use my money wisely? How they came to that decision can convey the values, can convey someone's thought process in a way that's much more palatable, frankly, and much more real than just saying, this is the way you got to do it. Just saying, well, here's what I did. Here's how I thought through. And so stories are really sort of a way to get around some of those natural defenses that come up when we just get very right-brained and very rigorous.
Would you say it gets easier over time to tell stories, to think of stories when you have that practice?
Yeah, I think part of it's just giving yourself permission too. Giving yourself permission to do it, and then also listening to other folks. So one exercise that I encourage everyone to do is just go out, just take a piece of paper, and from the time you wake up until the time you go to bed, just spend one day doing this. Note down all the stories you hear. You don't have to actually write out the whole story, but just, oh great, there was the man with the green hat, and Bob's business story in California, and Mary's project that's happening right now with marketing. Just sort of jot those down and pay attention to what stands out to you. I call this the story radar exercise. So before you even jump into building your own stories, just where are people engaged? What are people like? When do they lean in? When do they nod? What stories stand out to you? What are the easiest ones to remember? Which ones were like kind of a story but kind of not? Maybe they didn't complete. That's a great exercise, is that you start picking up all these little patterns that are out there in the media, conversations you have, and you start to get a sense for kind of stories that you like and that stories other folks like. So listening, I think, is probably the first way to jump into this.
Well, I can say that during this and the other job chats that we've talked about stories, you've given us a completely different perspective on stories, and that it's not just storytelling, that there's so much more to it, and we really appreciate that. If somebody wanted some more information, where could they reach you?
On the web at 7storylearning.com, SEVEN, storylearning.com. Thanks.
Wonderful. You can hear more advice from Andrew and other experts by listening to past chats on our website at www.newlandingsjobchat.org, or just search for Job Chat on YouTube. Thanks again, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. And until next time, may your days be full of health, happiness, and success.